So today I want to talk about video games, more specifically the idea of comparing some games to more bigger, successful, and established titles. Think of this as more of a video essay or commentary. Although I don't quite have the means to do much with visuals, I do appreciate the listen. When it comes to game journalism or reviews, we often see this cliche of comparing a game to another, such as comparing a game to something like Dark Souls. I wanted to explore this idea more and how this way of thinking can be good or even bad. Also, I want to talk about some examples as well. With so many video games out there, you see often enough that one game reminds you of another. Usually it's a more bigger series or successful title. I think it can range from taking inspiration or paying homage to having similar gameplay and mechanics, especially if it makes sense to a certain genre of game, to also feeling like a cheap knockoff. So let's move towards why making these comparisons can be a good thing. A positive thing about making these comparisons is that it can help the game to appeal to an existing audience. Dark Souls is a great example. Some things that stand out with Dark Souls and other From Software titles is a dark fantasy aesthetic, its highly challenging difficulty, and giving the player the sense of being alone with everything out to get them. I often see this comparison with other game genres outside of the action RPG, such as Metroidvania games such as Hollow Knight, Blasphemy, and The Tarnishing of Juxia. I even think it's fun to make these comparisons to see the inspiration with seeing what reminds me of Dark Souls visually or gameplay mechanics, but still seeing it as a completely different game and experience. If done well, it's great to see something familiar but done with a twist. Another positive thing with comparing to bigger or more established titles is that it sets up an expectation to how the game will play like. A common one, although it's not a specific title, is Metroidvanias. There's also examples such as kart racers similar to Mario Kart or platform fighters similar to Smash Bros. It feels like it's at a point that these series or titles are almost becoming a genre on their own. I think this helps the consumer or gamer to have a good idea of what the game would be like. It's almost like how Spotify recommends similar music or how Netflix recommends similar shows that you watch or listen to. With so much content out there, it can be tough to filter what is worth my time. To be honest, if it weren't for these comparisons to bigger titles or series, there'd be a handful of games, typically from smaller or indie developers, that I would completely miss out on. Now, some reasons why making these comparisons can be bad. One thing is that it feels like it can undermine the efforts of a smaller developer. It can lead to thoughts like, this game is only good because it's like Dark Souls, or it's not as good as Smash Bros. Another concern is that with focusing so much on what's similar, you may miss out what makes a smaller or indie game unique and different. One more issue is that it can set an unrealistic expectation, which can lead to disappointment, especially when these comparisons are to bigger AAA studios. A great example is Super Smash Bros. It's such a great series and improved so much over time, that when playing other platformer fighters, I can't help feeling how it's inferior to Super Smash Bros. And that I'd rather play Smash instead. I feel like it makes it really tough for another platformer fighter to stand out when there's always Smash Bros. And constant comparisons to that series. One example I also wanted to talk about is a game called Athenian Rhapsody, which is still in development and has a demo on Steam. Looking at this game, it has clear inspiration from Undertale and Earthbound, being from its gameplay, appearance, and even sense of humor. Playing through the demo myself, I often caught myself feeling that Undertale is a much better game and constantly thinking about Undertale instead of Athenian Rhapsody. Reflecting on it more, I think it's not quite as fair to judge Athenian Rhapsody so harshly comparing it to Undertale. It does a lot of things on its own, such as having more colors and details compared to Undertale, even party characters you can switch out with. The full game isn't out yet, but one of the big mechanics is that you can share your playthrough or Rhapsody with others. So there's some really unique mechanics I could have missed out on if I wrote off Athenian Rhapsody as just an Undertale ripoff. Although it's fun to make these comparisons to see the inspiration, it's just as important to see a game for its own merits. The last few examples I wanted to talk about are games that feel more like ripoffs or cash grabs. Mario Kart has been a standard for kart racers, but you see games based off other properties such as DreamWorks, Garfield, and even Fox cartoons including Family Guy that just feel like uninspired carbon copies. There are also knockoffs of party games as well, similar to Mario Party, that are pretty awful. Some standout examples are Shrek's Super Party and Sonic Shuffle. It's bizarre because these games seem to stray so far from the Mario Party formula, besides the board game aspect and occasional minigame. It's like that meme of, can I copy your homework? Just don't make it look like you copied me. It's so weird to see developers disregard what works to make something different. It's like they rely on being called a party game or kart racer or whatever just to be considered good enough. The final example I wanted to talk about is Super Smash Bros. Some more. The first Smash Bros. Game came out back in 1999, nearly 25 years ago, and pretty much defined what it means to be a platformer fighter. To this day, I can't think of another game that holds a candle up to Smash Bros. There are similar games like PlayStation All-Star Battle Royale, which seems pretty bad. There's also Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, which seems competent, but still lacking. An example I can think of that can compare well to Smash Bros. Is Multiverses. I personally enjoy this game and feels like it does a lot of things right, even though it's a free-to-play game that at times can push microtransactions. So even though I can enjoy Multiverses, I feel like it just can't compare to Smash Bros. And always feels like that's the more superior title. It feels like these rip-off games can be more from bigger developers relying on properties such as Sony, DreamWorks, or Nickelodeon, compared to indie games which the inspiration is more endearing, rather than a desperate attempt to make an appealing game. So when it comes to making games that are similar to bigger titles, the most important thing is delivery. Whether a game is coming from a small indie developer to a bigger one, it's going to become more apparent that it's taking inspiration and building upon something, or just a low effort to make a game with hopes that it sells well to a naive consumer. You'll see examples of this being done well, such as making a fresh new take or twist on something existing, but also examples which just feels lazy and uninspired. Funny enough, to me it feels like more indie developers succeed with this, while bigger studios fail. Maybe it's the passion and heart that shows with more smaller studios, but it always brings me joy to see smaller titles succeed so well. There's also the negative side of making these comparisons, such as taking merits away from the developer, or setting preconceived expectations with being compared to a bigger and quote-unquote better game. So in conclusion, whether you love it or hate it, these comparisons are here to stay. Whether it be from game journalists, from YouTube channels, or just someone on Twitter, you'll always hear comparisons to games like Dark Souls, Smash Bros, and even Legend of Zelda. To me, I find it to be mostly a good thing. Honestly, if it weren't for them, there'd be so many hidden gems I might have missed out on. There's that saying, don't judge a book by its cover. But with so many books, or in this case video games, you just have to. It might not be quite fair to compare games to bigger titles, but I think it helps show which games really have heart, and which games are just lazy cash grabs. And also I could think it can be a little annoying for game journalists or reviewers to make this comparison as just a lazy way to talk about a game. Finally, I think it's really important to take this with a grain of salt and make an effort to appreciate a game for what it really is, rather than just comparisons to another game. Thanks for listening, and let me know in the comments below what you think of the idea of comparing games to similar or more successful titles, and what other examples you can think of. Later.